Hey guys, welcome to the weekly question video. If you would like to leave us a question, details on how to do that is down below, as well as a link to our Patreon. If you want to get even more content and support the channel, definitely check us out over there. This week's question is, would we consider quitting domestic discipline if the head of household is just really inconsistent? I think that this person was asking this because they're in this situation where they brought domestic discipline to their partner with the intention of that partner being the head of household. They initially agreed to it, but they just don't seem to be holding up their end of the bargain. They're inconsistent. They're not, punishing sufficiently. All of those things that can lead to a lot of frustration when you are starting domestic discipline, or even if you've been in it for a while and you start to experience these problems, they can be really, really frustrating or dynamic because it really does break down the systems, right? And so first I want to say it is completely normal to experience these types of growing pains. It is completely normal to have a head of household or even a taken in hand that has a really hard time assuming the responsibility of their role. And so with this question, the focus was on an inconsistent head of household. I would say that it's definitely worth a question. It's definitely worth a conversation if your head of household is not holding consistency, if they are not doing what they initially said that they would do. It's worth bringing up and asking some questions and trying to figure out, is this something that they actually want to do? Because they may really want to, they may just be struggling with how. And that is something that Coda went through for a long time, where he really wanted to assume the authority of being a head of household, to lead our relationship, to have authority over me. But he really struggled with how to do that and how to assume that authority in a way that was authentic to who he was and who he wanted to be. And I think that that is something that a lot of head of households do struggle with, especially in the beginning, especially if you are coming into this with a very established relationship where you have years and years and years worth of history of your relationship functioning a certain way. And then you bring domestic discipline into it, and all of a sudden you want your relationship to function a completely different way than it has ever functioned before. And that can be kind of hard to conceptualize, and it can be hard to execute those changes. Coda and I just did a bonus video for our patrons where we talked about kind of some of the struggles that we faced when changing our mindsets to be where we are now in our domestic discipline, because it is a complete mindset shift. It is a complete mindset change. So just because a head of household is inconsistent doesn't necessarily mean that they are unwilling to participate in domestic discipline. It can be really, really frustrating for a taken in hand to feel like there's no accountability, to feel like there's a lack of consistency. And so it is tempting to kind of throw your hands up and be like, I'm not going to do this anymore. Like, you're not in this, and I can't do this by myself, so we're just not going to. That is a temptation. However, I think before you go there, you really do need to look at why are we experiencing the inconsistency? Why are we experiencing the lack of communication, the lack of connection? Like, all of these things that people talk about are being the benefits of domestic discipline. Why aren't we getting those things for ourselves? Like, why aren't we experiencing those things? And the short answer is that it takes a lot of work to get there. And it takes a lot of effort to change your mindset, to get into the system and into the routines that are required to start to see those benefits. And so if you're not seeing those benefits, it could be that one or both of you are just not willing to do what it takes to assume the roles that you need to assume to have a successful domestic discipline. Or it could be that you just need to communicate more, you need to connect more, you need to figure out what you need to do in order to reach those goals. And that's going to require conversations, that's going to require check-ins, that's going to require a lot of communication. When Coda and I were first starting, he was very apprehensive to punish me harshly because he was coming from that social conditioning of, you don't hurt your spouse, you don't hit your wife, right? That's a very common social conditioning of our society, and it is a good one. But when we're talking about domestic discipline, there's a difference between consensual discipline and hitting. And he had to really conceptualize that difference and come into an understanding of the consensual aspect of our relationship and what we were both agreeing to do so that he could then fulfill his role to discipline me properly. It took a lot of conversations for me to reaffirm and make sure that he understood, like, I am agreeing to this. This is what I want from our relationship too. And it also took a lot of conversations for me to let him know and give him feedback, like, that punishment wasn't really harsh enough. It wasn't intense enough. So it took a long time for that level of intensity to get to a place where it was actually beneficial for our relationship. Also, consistency. It took a lot of conversations for me to communicate to Coda why consistency was so important for the success of our relationship. I think that so many times a head of household will want to be gracious and kind to their taken in hand. And so they don't see a lack of consistency as being a negative. They actually see it as like, oh, I'm being gracious towards them. I'm not holding unrealistic standards. I'm not being a tyrant towards my taken in hand because I'm being so gracious. I'm letting these things slide. I'm being understanding of the nuances of this situation. But what they don't realize is that that's actually causing more insecurity, and that's causing maybe a lack of trust and maybe even a lack of authority to manifest in the relationship. So I had to talk to Coda and let him know why consistency was so important to me and to our relationship, and what his lack of consistency was actually communicating, because he had no idea. And that took a lot of communication. That took a lot of, coming together and trying to figure out, okay, what is this really going to look like? And what do I need? What does he need? And how do we make that work? How do we make that fit into our lives? Because domestic discipline is not something that we do. It's something that we incorporate into who we are and how we function as a couple. And so when we were talking about these things, we really had to talk about how to incorporate this into our relationship and into our just how we function as a couple in a way that was sustainable long term, that would honor who Coda was and who I was, so that these things could function cohesively together, right? And so I would say that just because you're experiencing a lack of consistency, or just because you are experiencing, a head of household that isn't necessarily punishing adequately, that's not a reason to call it quits, but it is a reason to have some very in-depth and intentional conversations to see where this is going. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed that question. If you want to leave us a question, leave it down below, and we will talk to you guys next week.